The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched far into the darkness above. 12 different species sat at their curved tables, each representative surrounded by the soft glow of their translation devices. The air hummed with quiet conversations in languages that sounded like music, clicking sounds, and deep rumbles that made the floor vibrate. Ambassador Cathara of the Zephyrian Republic looked down at the documents on her desk. Her forearms moved gracefully as she turned the pages, her large eyes scanning the simple text. The request was written in basic galactic common, with no fancy words or complex legal terms. It was straightforward and honest, just like humans always were. The Human Federation requests permission to withdraw from the Galactic Council, she read aloud to herself. We believe our species has fundamental differences in how we view governance, conflict resolution, and social organization. We do not wish to cause further disruption to the peaceful progress of the Council. Cathara's throat made a soft, trilling sound, which was how her people showed amusement. Humans and their dramatic words. They always made everything sound so serious. The truth was simpler. Humans were difficult. They asked too many questions. They disagreed with established rules. They wanted to change things that had worked perfectly well for thousands of years. Councillor Vextai leaned over from the Altarian Federation table. His green skin had the metallic shine that showed he was pleased. Finally, he whispered to Cathara. 50 years of their chaos is enough. Cathara nodded. She remembered when humans first arrived in Council space. They had been so excited, so eager to join galactic civilization. But they never learned to follow proper procedures. When the Rim pirates attacked trade routes 5 years ago, humans wanted to hunt them down and destroy their bases. The Council had voted for economic sanctions instead, which was the civilized approach. Humans called it feeding problems instead of solving them. When the Benatar system had a civil war, humans wanted to send military support to the democratic rebels. The Council chose to mediate peace talks between both sides, which took 3 years but ended the fighting. Humans said they were helping dictators stay in power. They never understood that stability was more important than their strange ideas about freedom. The worst incident happened 2 years ago. A plague struck the outer colonies and humans developed a cure, but instead of sharing it through proper council channels, they sent ships directly to affected worlds. They saved millions of lives, but they broke 17 different protocols. The investigation took longer than the actual rescue operation. Representative Thrak of the Kraxan Military Alliance stood up. His massive frame cast shadows across the floor. Even sitting down, he was taller than most species when they stood. Let us vote, he rumbled in his deep voice. The humans have made their choice. We should respect it. The other representatives murmured agreement. Thrak was right, of course. If humans wanted to leave, that was their decision. The galaxy would be more peaceful without them. Ambassador Chen Mei-Lin sat at the human table. She was small compared to most council members, but she had always carried herself with dignity. Her dark eyes showed no emotion as she watched the other representatives discuss her people's future. She had served on the council for 15 years, always trying to build bridges between humanity and the other species. Ambassador Chen, Cathara said formally, does your government have anything to add to this request? Chen stood up slowly. Her voice was clear and steady when she spoke. The Human Federation thanks the Council for 50 years of membership. We have learned much from all of you. We hope our departure will bring the peace and stability you seek. There was something in her tone that made Cathara pause. It wasn't sadness or anger. It was something else, something she couldn't identify. Chen continued speaking. We will withdraw all human colonies from Council space within 6 months. Our trade agreements will end on the dates specified in our contracts. We will share all current research projects with appropriate Council departments before we leave. Vextai leaned forward. What about your military bases? Your deep space monitoring stations? Everything will be abandoned or transferred to Council control, Chen replied. We will leave nothing behind except empty buildings. The vote was quick and unanimous. 12 species raised their hands to accept humanity's withdrawal. No one asked humans to reconsider. No one suggested compromise or reform. The relief in the room was clear to everyone. After the session ended, representatives gathered in small groups, talking excitedly about new opportunities. Trade routes could be reorganized. Military budgets could be reduced. The constant human requests for contingency planning and emergency protocols could finally be ignored. Chen gathered her papers quietly. A few representatives nodded politely as she passed, but no one tried to speak with her. She had expected this. Humans had never really belonged here anyway. 6 months later, the withdrawals began. Human colonies went silent one by one, their communications stopping at exactly the times they had promised. Council ships sent to verify the evacuations found empty cities, abandoned farms, and silent space stations. Everything valuable had been taken, but the infrastructure was left intact and undamaged. The efficiency surprised many council members. Humans had moved millions of people and massive amounts of equipment without asking for help or causing any disruption to galactic commerce. They had simply vanished as quietly as they had promised. Within a year, it was as if humans had never existed. Their former territories were redistributed among council species. Their trade routes were taken over by more reliable partners. Their research projects were continued by more cooperative scientists. The galaxy was peaceful at last. The Galactic Council could focus on important things like art, philosophy, and the slow, careful progress of true civilization. No more human questions about what if this goes wrong or what happens when diplomacy fails. Representative Thrax stood in his new office, looking out at stars that had once been watched by human sensors. The view was beautiful and calm. For the first time in 50 years, he could appreciate it without worrying about what humans might do next. He didn't notice the small, dark objects that drifted past his window, moving too slowly to trigger any alarms. They looked like space debris, the kind that was common near old trade routes. There was no reason to think they might be something else. The galaxy was finally at peace. 20 years had passed since humans left the galaxy. The Galactic Council had grown from 12 species to 16, welcoming new members who appreciated the benefits of civilized cooperation. Trade flowed smoothly along established routes. Conflicts were rare and quickly resolved through mediation. Art and science flourished in the peaceful environment that humans had never quite understood. Councillor Vextai, now the senior representative for external affairs, stood before a map of the galaxy in the Council's strategic planning room. The map showed trade routes in blue, communication networks in green, and defense installations in yellow. Everything was organized, predictable, and safe. Our expansion into the former human territories is complete, he told the assembled Defense Committee. The Zephyrian Republic has established research stations in 7 systems. The Altarian Federation has built new trade hubs in 12 locations. Even the Outer Rim worlds are producing valuable resources. Admiral Corthus of the Centauri Republic nodded approvingly. He was young for his position, promoted during the peaceful years when military experience mattered less than administrative skills. Our patrol fleets report no unusual activity. The automated defense networks humans left behind have been integrated into our systems. Representative Silek of the newly joined Coral Syndicate raised one of her tentacles. My people's deep space scanners detect some unusual readings from the galactic rim. Metal signatures that don't match known ship designs. Vextai made a dismissive gesture, probably debris from ancient civilizations. The rim territories have always had strange readings. Nothing to worry about. The first attack came 3 days later. The mining world of Kepler's Fortune was a small, peaceful planet on the edge of Council space. It had a population of 2 million, mostly Altarian workers and their families. The planet's automated defense systems detected the incoming ships when they were still 3 hours away. The scanner readings were confusing. The ships didn't match any known design. They were angular and dark, made of materials that seemed to absorb sensor beams instead of reflecting them. They moved in perfect formation, like a single organism with many parts. Captain Zorth of the planet's defense force sent a standard greeting. Unknown vessels, this is Kepler's Fortune traffic control. Please identify yourselves and state your business in council space. The response came not in words, but in action. The unknown ships opened fire with weapons that cut through the planet's shields like they weren't there. The defensive satellites were destroyed in seconds. The orbital stations didn't even have time to send distress signals before they were reduced to glowing metal fragments. Captain Zorth managed to send one final message before his command center was vaporized. They're not trying to conquer us. They're eating everything. The ships landed on Kepler's Fortune and released millions of small machines that swarmed across the surface. They consumed everything they touched: buildings, vehicles, plants, animals, even the soil itself. Within 6 hours, the planet was stripped down to bare rock. The machines returned to their ships, which then moved on to the next system. When Council rescue fleets arrived a week later, they found only empty space where a thriving world had been. Even the asteroid belts had been cleared of useful materials. Admiral Corthus stared at the reports in disbelief. This is impossible. No species could strip a planet this thoroughly in such a short time. The evidence is clear, said Dr. Ylara, the Council's chief scientist. These beings, whatever they are, have technology far beyond our understanding. They appear to be some kind of hive mind focused entirely on consuming raw materials. More attacks followed. The pattern was always the same: swift, total consumption followed by movement to the next target. The attackers, whom the Council began calling Devourers, seemed unstoppable. Council fleets were sent to intercept them. The results were devastating. Traditional weapons had little effect on Devourer ships, which seemed to be made of self-repairing materials. Worse, the Devourers learned from each encounter, adapting their tactics and defenses. After losing 3 entire fleets, the Council tried diplomacy. Ambassador Cathara, now elderly but still sharp, led a peace mission to contact the Devourers directly. The meeting took place in neutral space. Cathara's diplomatic ship approached a massive Devourer vessel that looked like a metallic mountain covered in sensors and weapons. She broadcast greetings in over 300 languages, offered trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and territorial concessions. The Devourer response was simple and terrifying. Biological entities are inefficient. Resources locked in organic forms serve no purpose. Conversion to useful materials will begin immediately. Cathara's ship was consumed in seconds. The diplomatic fleet tried to escape, but only 2 ships made it back to Council space. Panic began to spread through the galaxy. Refugee ships crowded trade routes as entire systems evacuated ahead of the Devourer advance. The Council's careful order started to break down as species looked out for themselves first. In the strategic planning room, Vextai stared at the updated map. Red zones now covered 1/3 of the galaxy, marking areas under Devourer control. The neat blue trade routes were broken. The green communication networks were silent in huge regions. "We need new strategies," Admiral Corthus said desperately. "Our current weapons and tactics are useless against them." "What about the old human military files?" suggested Dr. Ylara. "They always seemed obsessed with worst-case scenarios and impossible threats." Vextai's metallic skin dulled with distress. "We deleted most of those records. They were full of paranoid assumptions and aggressive strategies that went against Council values. I have some archived footage," Corthus said quietly, "from training exercises humans conducted in their territory. I kept them as examples of their excessive militarism. The footage was disturbing to watch. Human ships moved like predators using asteroids and gas clouds for cover. Their weapons were designed not just to destroy enemy ships, but to deny them any chance of repair or escape. Their battle tactics assumed that every fight would be a desperate struggle for survival. Look at this." Corthus pointed to a scene where human ships sacrificed themselves to destroy a larger target. They built their vessels expecting crews to die. Every ship has multiple backup systems and self-destruct capabilities. Dr. Ylara studied the technical specifications with growing amazement. "These aren't just weapons. They're survival tools. Everything is designed with the assumption that the universe itself is hostile." Vextai felt a cold understanding creeping through his mind. "They didn't leave because they were afraid of us. They left because they knew something was coming," Corthus finished. "Something that would require the kind of ruthless, paranoid thinking we found so disturbing." As the Devourer fleets moved closer to the core worlds, the Council faced a terrible realization. All their civilization, all their peaceful progress, all their careful diplomacy meant nothing against an enemy that saw them only as raw materials to be processed. Somewhere in the dark between stars, the species that had built weapons like works of art and planned for impossible wars might still exist, but they had left in silence and the Council had been grateful to see them go. Now, as their perfect civilization crumbled before an unstoppable force, that silence felt like the loudest sound in the galaxy. The Devourer War had been raging for 18 months. Half the galaxy was now under their control, transformed from living worlds into empty space filled only with metal structures that pulsed with alien energy. The Galactic Council, once proud of their 16-member alliance, was down to 9 surviving species. The Coral Syndicate had been the first to fall completely. Their beautiful underwater cities, built over thousands of years, were consumed in mere days. The Devourers seemed particularly interested in their bioluminescent technology, stripping every coral world down to the bedrock to extract the glowing organisms. Representative Thrak sat in what remained of the council chambers. Half the seats were empty now, their former occupants either dead or fled to the furthest edges of known space. His massive frame seemed smaller somehow, worn down by months of constant retreat and impossible decisions. "The evacuation of the Zephyrian home system is complete," reported Admiral Corthus. Dark circles under his eyes showed the strain of commanding a war that couldn't be won. 3 billion refugees are scattered across our remaining territories. Counselor Vextai's metallic skin had lost all its shine. Where once it had gleamed with health and confidence, now it was dull gray like old machinery. "The fleet losses from last week?" 67 ships, Corthus replied quietly, including the dreadnought Eternal Peace. Total crew loss was 43,000. The numbers were becoming meaningless. So many had died that individual tragedies blurred together into a constant background of grief. Entire species were being erased from existence, their cultures and histories consumed along with their worlds. Dr. Yalara activated the holographic display at the center of the room. The galactic map appeared, but now it was mostly red. The Devourer-controlled zones stretched across vast regions that had once been the heart of civilization. "There's something else," she said hesitantly. "Something we've been detecting for the past few weeks." The map zoomed in on several systems that had been marked as completely consumed. According to all sensors, these areas were empty of life, stripped of all useful materials, abandoned by the Devourers as they moved on to fresh targets. "We're picking up ghost signals from dead human worlds," Dr. Yalara continued. "Quantum echoes that shouldn't exist. It's as if something is watching from those empty systems." Vextai leaned forward. "Watching? What kind of watching?" "We sent probe ships to investigate 3 of the former human colonies. The probes found nothing, no structures, no technology, no signs of life. But they all reported the same thing, the feeling of being observed." Admiral Corthus frowned. "Probes don't have feelings." "No, but their AI systems do have threat assessment protocols, and all of them registered maximum danger warnings despite finding nothing to threaten them." The room fell silent. Everyone was thinking the same thing, but no one wanted to say it out loud. After 20 years of silence, were humans still out there? Thrak was the first to speak. "Could they have survived?" "Impossible," Vextai said automatically. "We monitored their evacuation. Every human world went dark. Every human ship disappeared from our sensors. But what if that was intentional?" Dr. Yalara asked. "What if they didn't evacuate? What if they just hid?" The idea seemed ridiculous. How could an entire species hide in empty space? How could they survive for 20 years without any visible infrastructure or supply lines? But then Corthus remembered something from the old human military files. "They had a saying," he said slowly. "Something about the best place to hide being in plain sight." Another alarm sounded. Yet another world was under attack. The Devourers had reached the Altarian Federation's core systems, including their beautiful garden worlds where art and philosophy had flourished for millennia. As they watched the tactical display, the council members saw their civilization's death playing out in real time. The Devourer fleet moved with mechanical precision, their ships arranged in perfect geometric patterns that spoke of pure, cold intelligence. "We need to try something different," Thrak said desperately. "Every conventional strategy has failed." "What's left to try?" Vextai asked. "We've used every weapon in our arsenal. We've tried diplomacy, economics, even biological warfare. Nothing works." Dr. Yalara was studying her sensor readings with a puzzled expression. "There's something odd about the Devourer advance patterns. They're avoiding certain areas." She highlighted several systems on the map. They were scattered throughout Devourer-controlled space, small regions that seemed to have been bypassed despite containing valuable resources. "What's special about these systems?" Corthus asked. "They're all former human territories," Dr. Yalara replied. "Places where humans had minor outposts or research stations. The Devourers consume everything around them, but they don't enter these specific areas." Vexitai's dull skin brightened slightly with hope. "Maybe there are defensive systems we don't know about. Hidden weapons the humans left behind." But Corthus was thinking about something else. In the old human military files, There had been discussions about something called defensive positioning, not building walls to keep enemies out, but positioning yourself where enemies wouldn't want to go. What if it's not about weapons? He said slowly. What if it's about making yourself too dangerous to attack? The others stared at him. What do you mean? The humans always talked about asymmetric warfare, fighting enemies who were stronger than you by changing the rules of engagement. What if they found a way to make the Devourers afraid? It sounded impossible. The Devourers had shown no emotion except hunger. They consumed everything without hesitation or mercy. What could possibly make them afraid? But as the council members studied the map, they began to see a pattern. The avoided systems weren't random. They formed a rough network throughout space like a web of invisible barriers that the Devourers respected. Dr. Yalara activated her communication panel. I'm going to send scan sweeps to those avoided systems. Deep space probes with the most sensitive equipment we have. The probes were launched within hours. As they traveled toward the mysterious empty zones, their signals grew weaker and more distorted. Several probes simply vanished without any indication of what had happened to them. But one probe managed to transmit data before it disappeared. The information it sent back changed everything. Hidden in the shadow of a dead moon, the probe had detected something impossible. A human ship. Not the remains of a human ship. Not debris or wreckage. An active operational vessel that appeared to be very much alive. And according to the probe's final transmission, it wasn't alone. The galaxy was full of ghosts, and some of those ghosts were still watching. The Council's final stronghold was the Nexus Station, a massive structure built in the center of the galaxy, where space lanes from all directions met. Once it had been a symbol of unity and cooperation, where thousands of species came to trade and share knowledge. Now it was a fortress surrounded by the last remnants of galactic civilization. Refugee ships filled every docking bay and floated in holding patterns that stretched for millions of kilometers. The station's population had swelled from 50,000 to over 20 million in just 6 months. Food was running short. The air recycling systems were failing. Fights broke out daily between desperate people from different species who blamed each other for the disaster. Admiral Corthus stood in the command center, watching the tactical display with growing despair. Red markers showed Devourer fleets approaching from all directions. They had completely surrounded the Nexus, cutting off all escape routes. This would be the final battle, and everyone knew how it would end. Fleet status report, he called out. 86 operational warships remaining, replied his aide, a young Zephyrian whose voice shook with exhaustion. Ammunition supplies at 12%. Hull repairs ongoing on 37 vessels. Representative Thrak entered the command center, his massive frame moving slowly. Age and stress had finally caught up with the old warrior. The civilian evacuation ships are ready, he rumbled. But there's nowhere for them to go. Through the viewing ports, they could see the Devourer fleet massing in the distance. Thousands of dark angular ships that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. They moved with perfect coordination, like the fingers of some massive hand closing around its prey. Counselor Vextai activated the emergency communication system. His voice echoed throughout the station as he addressed the refugees and military personnel. Citizens of the galaxy, he began, his words translated into hundreds of languages. We have fought bravely against an impossible enemy. We have shown that civilization can stand together against darkness. Though we may fall, the values we represent will survive in the memory of the universe. It was a beautiful speech, but everyone knew it was really a farewell. Dr. Yalara burst into the command center, her forearms clutching data tablets. I found something, she shouted, in the old human archives.
There's a message!
She activated the main display and uploaded a file that had been buried deep in the diplomatic records. It was marked with a timestamp from exactly 20 years ago, the day humans had officially left the galaxy. Ambassador Chen's face appeared on the screen, looking exactly as she had during the final council session. But this recording was different. Her expression was serious, almost grim. This message is coded to activate only under specific conditions, her recorded voice said. If you are watching this, it means the galaxy is facing an extinction-level threat that your conventional military and diplomatic resources cannot handle. The command center fell silent. Even the background chatter of communications equipment seemed to stop. Chen continued. Humanity withdrew from the Galactic Council not because we were dissatisfied with your leadership, but because we recognized fundamental differences in how our species approach survival. We are what our homeworld made us, a species that assumes the universe is actively trying to kill us. Admiral Corthus leaned forward. There's more. During our time with the Council, we learned much about your civilizations, your strengths, and your limitations. We also learned about threats that existed beyond the edges of known space. We tried to warn you about the necessity of preparing for worst-case scenarios, but our concerns were dismissed as paranoid militarism. Vextai's metallic skin flickered with recognition. The contingency planning sessions, all those requests for defensive preparations that we voted down, rather than force unwanted changes on your peaceful society, we chose to withdraw and prepare alone. We have spent the last 20 years becoming what the galaxy needed us to become, the monsters that keep other monsters away. The recording shifted to show coordinates and a communication frequency. If you are facing threats beyond your ability to handle, we may be contacted through quantum beacon frequency 2847.3. The coordinates included will lead you to a system we have designated as culturally significant. Dr. Yillara was already working on her equipment. I can broadcast on that frequency, but it will take several hours to modify our quantum communicators. Do it, Thrak ordered. Whatever it takes. As Dr. Yillara worked frantically to establish contact, the Devourer fleets began their final approach. Long-range sensors showed them organizing into attack formations. They would reach the Nexus in less than 6 hours. The quantum beacon finally activated, sending a simple message toward the coordinates Chen had provided. This is the Galactic Council requesting emergency assistance under the provisions of Archived Message 2847.3. We are facing extinction and need immediate help. The response came faster than anyone expected. Within minutes, a new signal appeared on their sensors. It was small, moving impossibly fast, and coming from a direction where nothing should exist. The object resolved into a single ship as it approached the Nexus. It was unlike anything the Council had ever seen. Sleek and predatory, covered in scars that spoke of battles against unimaginable enemies. Its hull seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, and weapons that didn't appear on any known schematics were mounted along its length. Admiral Corthus tried to hail the approaching vessel. Unknown ship. This is Admiral Corthus of the Galactic Defense Fleet. Please identify yourself. The response came in perfect galactic common, but with an accent that sent chills down every spine in the command center. It was human but changed somehow, made harder and colder by 20 years in the dark between stars. This is Admiral Sarah Chen, commanding the human vessel Sword of Damocles, the voice said. We received your distress call. I understand you're having a problem with pests. The human ship took position between the Nexus and the approaching Devourer fleet. It was tiny compared to the enemy force, one vessel against thousands. But something about its presence made the tactical displays flicker with new readings. Admiral Chen, Corthus called out, you need to retreat. That fleet will destroy you in seconds. There was a pause, and when Chen's voice came back, there was something in it that made the temperature in the command center seem to drop. Admiral, you've been thinking about this all wrong. We're not here to fight fair. On the tactical display, new contacts began appearing throughout the system. Ships that had been hiding in asteroid fields, gas cloud formations, and the shadows of dead planets. They were everywhere, invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. The cavalry has arrived, Chen announced. Time to show these things what humans learned in the dark. The first phase of the real war was about to begin. What happened next would be studied by military historians for centuries, though most would struggle to understand how it was possible. The human fleet that emerged from hiding was not large, perhaps 300 ships compared to the thousands that the Devourers commanded. But these were not the vessels that had left Council space 20 years ago. They had been transformed into something that made Admiral Corthus's blood run cold just looking at them. Each ship was a masterpiece of destructive engineering. Their hulls flowed like living things, reshaping themselves as weapons emerged from hidden compartments. They moved with a grace that seemed impossible for machines, darting through space like predators that had evolved in the vacuum between stars. All Council forces maintained defensive positions around Nexus Station. Admiral Chen's voice crackled through the communication system. Do not engage unless directly ordered. This is about to get very messy. The Devourers reacted to the human presence with their usual mechanical precision. Their fleet formations shifted into attack patterns, weapons powering up with energy signatures that had destroyed entire star systems. They had faced every type of military force the galaxy could produce, and they had consumed them all. But they had never faced humans who had spent 20 years preparing for this exact moment. The first surprise came when the Devourers tried to communicate with the human fleet, sending their standard message about converting biological entities into useful materials. Instead of fear or attempts at diplomacy, the humans sent back a response that chilled every council observer who heard it. "We received your message," came Admiral Chen's reply. "We decline your offer. Counter-proposal: leave our galaxy or be destroyed." The Devourer's response was predictable: immediate and overwhelming attack. Thousands of ships opened fire simultaneously, filling space with enough destructive energy to vaporize entire moons. That was when the humans showed what they had really learned in the darkness. The attack never reached them. Instead, the energy beams bent and twisted, redirected by fields that shouldn't exist according to known physics. Some shots curved back on themselves, striking Devourer ships with their own weapons. Others simply vanished into holes that opened in space itself. "Impossible," breathed Dr. Yalara, watching from the Nexus command center. "They're manipulating space-time itself." But the humans were just getting started. Their ships began to move in patterns that hurt to watch, seeming to be in multiple places at once. They phased in and out of normal space, appearing inside Devourer formations and unleashing weapons that turned enemy vessels inside out. The Devourers tried to adapt, as they always did. Their ships began modifying their shields and weapons to counter human tactics. It was a strategy that had worked against every other opponent they had faced. Against humans, it was a fatal mistake. "You learn fast," Admiral Chen's voice carried across all frequencies, somehow reaching every ship in both fleets. "But we've had 20 years to study you. We know exactly how you adapt, and we've prepared for every single possibility." The human fleet split into smaller groups, each one targeting a different aspect of Devourer technology. Some ships released clouds of nanomachines that infected Devourer vessels, turning their own adaptive systems against them. Others deployed weapons that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, bypassing any defense that operated in normal space. But the most terrifying weapons were the ones that attacked the Devourer's hive mind directly. Human ships broadcast signals that introduced chaos into the enemy's perfect coordination. Devourer formations began to break apart as ships received conflicting orders or simply lost contact with the collective intelligence that controlled them. "How is this possible?" Counselor Vextai whispered, his metallic skin flickering with confusion and awe. Admiral Corthus was studying the tactical displays with growing understanding. "They're not just fighting the Devourers. They're fighting the concept of the Devourers. Look at those weapon signatures." He was right. The humans weren't using conventional energy weapons or kinetic projectiles. They were deploying mathematics as warfare, using the fundamental forces of the universe as weapons. They had turned physics itself into a tool of destruction. The battle lasted 18 hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Devourers, who had consumed half the galaxy without suffering a single significant defeat, were being systematically destroyed by opponents who seemed to understand their every weakness. As the last Devourer ship was reduced to component atoms, Admiral Chen's vessel approached Nexus Station. The human ship looked even more alien up close, its hull covered in technology that pulsed with energies that couldn't be measured by Council instruments. "Nexus Station, this is Admiral Chen requesting permission to dock," came the familiar voice. "I believe we need to have a conversation." An hour later, Admiral Chen walked into the Council chambers. She looked older than she should have, her hair white and her face marked by lines that spoke of burdens no one else could understand. But her eyes were still sharp, still human, still recognizable as the diplomat who had left 20 years ago. The surviving council members stared at her in silence. Finally, Representative Thrak found his voice. "How?" he asked simply. Chen took her seat at the old human table, which had remained empty all these years. "We spent 2 decades becoming what the galaxy needed us to become," she said quietly. "We studied every threat that existed in dark space. We learned to think like predators because that's what the universe demanded. The technology you used, Dr. Yalara said hesitantly. It's beyond anything we thought possible. We had good teachers, Chen replied. The devourers weren't the only things lurking in the void. There are older species out there, things that make the devourers look like children playing with toys. We learned from some of them. We fought others. We became something new. Vextai leaned forward. What happens now? Will humanity rejoin the council? Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a sadness that made everyone in the room understand how much humanity had sacrificed. We can't come back. We're not the same species that left. We've seen too much, done too much. We've become the monsters that guard the dark so others can sleep safely in the light. She stood up and walked to the viewing port, looking out at the stars. But we'll still be watching. The galaxy is more dangerous than you know, and there are worse things than devourers waiting in the spaces between stars. Humanity will make sure they never reach the civilized worlds. Admiral Corthus joined her at the window. What about the humans who didn't become soldiers? The civilians, the families? Chen smiled, and for a moment she looked like the diplomat they remembered. They're safe. We built worlds you'll never find, places where human children can grow up in peace. But they know what their parents and grandparents became. They know the price that was paid for their safety. As Chen prepared to leave, Thrak asked one final question. If we had asked you to stay 20 years ago, would you have? Chen paused at the door. We tried to tell you what was coming. We tried to prepare you for the darkness, but you chose peace over preparedness, cooperation over strength. We couldn't force you to become what you weren't ready to be. She looked back at the assembled representatives one last time. The galaxy is safe now. But remember what you learned here. Civilization is fragile. Peace must be protected. And sometimes the price of that protection is becoming something the civilized world can never fully understand. The human ships departed as quietly as they had arrived, fading back into the spaces between stars. The council began the long work of rebuilding their civilization, always aware that somewhere in the darkness, humanity was standing guard against threats they could barely imagine. The galaxy was at peace again. But now they understood the true cost of that peace, and the debt they owed to the species that had chosen exile over compromise. In the vast emptiness of space, human ships resumed their eternal patrol, watching for threats that civilized species couldn't even conceive of. They had become the guardians of the galaxy, forever changed by their vigil in the dark. And in the deepest parts of space, where even light was afraid to travel, things that were older and hungrier than the devourers felt the presence of humanity and chose to remain hidden for a while. Longer, the monsters were afraid of other monsters now, and that was exactly how humanity preferred it.